I know a lot of people right now are interested in learning to sew, and typically most beginners have the same question. So just thought I'd share 10 tips that might help you start your sewing journey. The first tip or question that most people have is, what machine should they use? And really there's no right or wrong answer. Basically it's the machine that you can afford. You can go to Walmart and get a machine that's about $6,900, or machines that cost $300 or $400, and they even go higher than that. But it's basically whatever you can afford. Usually in a beginner project, you're only doing a straight stitch, maybe a zigzag stitch. So that's really all you would need. There are a lot of machines that have a lot of fancy stitches and decorative stitches. I've had machines that had those stitches and I probably never used it, and I have been sewing for a long time. So it does not really matter what machine you get. Just make sure if it's a new machine, just make sure it can do a straight stitch and a zigzag stitch, which is really all you would need. A good feature that I like on a machine is automatic buttonhole, but that's not necessary. You can do your own. Just a little more difficult if it's not an automatic feature on the machine. There are a few tools that you want to make sure you have in your sewing kit when you start. A good pair of scissors, so most likely scissors that you would find in like the Dollar Tree or Dollar General probably would not be good scissors. There are some good ones on Amazon. I'll link a pair that I found recently that are only $12.99. You can go to Joann, Hobby Lobby, Michaels. They have sales all the time. They have coupons all the time, so you can get a good pair. I believe my first pair of scissors when I started sewing was a pair of Gingers. I was a little girl, so I didn't buy those. My mom had them and she gave them to me. I actually still have a pair of Gingers that I got from her from I don't know how long ago. They're still good scissors. Of course, as time goes on, you have to get your scissors sharpened, but that just comes with it no matter what type you have. Also, you want to make sure you have straight pins or clips or weights, so when you're cutting out a project, you'll have something to hold the pattern pieces to the fabric. If you're using a rotary cutter instead of scissors, which a rotary cutter, if you're not familiar, it would look basically like a pizza wheel, but it's made to cut fabric. So if you're using a rotary cutter, then you need to have a surface that is the right surface to use a rotary cutter. So you wouldn't want to use a rotary cutter on your table or your floor because it will go through and cut it. There are specific mats. What's wrong? I don't know where I left off. So if you're using a rotary cutter, just make sure you have the special mat that's made for the rotary cutters. You can usually get those at Joann. I think Walmart may sell them. I know Walmart has like some kits that have like a smaller mat in them. There's different sources. You can get them online. Of course, everything you need you can probably get, well not probably, most likely everything you need to start sewing would be on Amazon. I like to use clips to hold my fabric in place when I'm actually sewing. So after I've cut out the pieces, I use the clips to hold it together while I feed it through the machine. So I always have clips. And I use the straight pins too. Straight pins are used to pin the pattern to your fabric just to hold it down while you're cutting it out. You can also use the straight pins or the clips when you're actually sewing the project to keep the pieces together. You probably want to have a measuring tape, which if you get like a basic sewing kit from the store, a measuring tape will probably come in there, and that's helpful if, like, say you have a pattern and you need to lengthen it. You might have a shirt pattern that you want to lengthen into a dress, or a dress that you want to shorten. You just use the measuring tape to measure your body, where you need to cut it off, and then there you go. You also use the measuring tape just to take your own measurements to see if a certain pattern fits or to see what size pattern you would need. Another thing you can do if you're not sure how to read the measurements on the pattern, take one of your own garments and lay the pattern piece on your garment. you know how your garment fits you, and then when you lay the pattern pieces on there, you can kind of see how it lines up. That'll help you figure out what size you need. Also some marking tools, and there's a lot of different ones. There's like pencils that will wash away, or markers that will wash away. And this is just to help you make certain markings on the pattern. Like if you need to adjust it, you can make a notation with the marking tool of where you need to adjust it. You can also use the marking tool to mark, like if you're shortening something, just mark on the fabric where you need to cut it off. Also, a seam ripper. I don't know how I could have forgotten a seam ripper. So no matter how good of a sewist, seamstress, tailor, whatever you want to call yourself, no matter how good you are, most likely you would need a seam ripper at some point. And it's basically what it says, a seam ripper. So if you've sewn something up and maybe there's a mistake, you use the seam ripper to rip that seam or cut the thread so you can redo it. You may use the seam ripper if something is too big, and you probably wouldn't need it if it was too big. If it was too small and you needed to let it out, you would use the seam ripper. Or if you just needed to change it all together, like doing thrift store redos or upcycling, you may use the seam ripper to rip out the stitches. Another thing you want to make sure you have would be needles. The needles actually go in the machine. So right now I'm not talking about hand sewing needles, but the needles that go in your machine. Most likely if you're buying a new machine, it already has a needle in it, which is just a universal needle, and it can pretty much sew any fabric, even a knit, even a denim. But there are specific needles for denim fabrics, needles for knit fabrics, which would be the ballpoint needles. And the package says on the needles exactly what they are or what fabrics they're for. Typically though, the needle that comes in your machine would do like most of your projects. You may want to just go ahead and have the ballpoint needle on hand if you know you'll be doing some knit projects. The reason is that sometimes the regular needles, when they punch through the fabric, it does not go all the way through, or it distorts it, or it pulls thread. So that's the reason you want to make sure you have a ballpoint needle, which is made for knits. And again, if you're looking in the store or looking online for knits, you want to look at the specific needles that are made for your machine. You also want to look at the needles made for that project. So like a denim needle would be for denim, of course, or like thicker fabric. So just pay attention or keep that in mind when you're planning your projects. When I started editing this video, I realized it was really long. So what you've just watched is part 1, and I'll link part 2 as a separate video in the comments.